Hey, Sean.
Yes, sir, Howard.
How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I'm always doing well.
You
Life
know,
is good.
yeah, it is good. We do this podcast, and it's kind of good, and we get to have drinks, and sometimes the drinks are great, and sometimes they're not. But
I think tonight we'll be happy with this one for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Okay, so I'm gonna set a scene for you.
Okay?
Again, imagine you're a police officer.
I have done this before, yes.
Okay, and imagine that you are a police officer for 3 decades,
Okay?
and you rise through the ranks in a major city,
That's the goal of most police officers.
right? And you end up being a police chief.
I'm on board with this.
And not only are you a police chief, but you are a female police chief.
All right. All right. So this is a relatively modern situation.
Right, because when most people think about police chief, they think of like some old guy, 400 years old, right? At least I do.
Fat,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
He
got
looks
you.
like, what was the guy on Hill Street Blues? Looks like that guy.
Got you. I
Yeah,
don't remember who it was.
absolutely. But we have Carmen Best on today, and she was the chief of Seattle,
Seattle
which
Police Chief.
is a big city
It is.
up in the northwest,
Yes.
which is very rainy. But she's on with us today. So, how are you, Miss Best?
I'm great. It is wonderful to be with you, both Sean and Howard. I'm glad to be here.
We are grateful to have you. We kind of talked a little bit before we jumped on an air here, and we have a wide range of guests on here. We kind of cover them all, honestly, and to have a police chief, a former police chief or chief, from a large agency, especially one of that size, it is definitely very unique for us, and we'll get into it a little bit later in the show. But what is even really unique is you were the chief of police there during one of the roughest times that in the modern day era for us in law enforcement of what's been going on in this country, and you kind of were the boss running the show there. So it's definitely a unique situation. We're very grateful for your time. I know, despite the fact that you are retired, you do keep busy.
Yeah,
Yeah, and she's going to give us some great insight.
I hope so. We'll see.
So we like to drink here too because it makes our personalities somewhat better as they are. You going to go ahead and tell us what you're having to drink tonight?
When you're going to shame me because I really didn't know I was supposed to have alcohol, but I'm having tangerine LaCroix.
Okay.
Fancy. Do you
Yeah.
have some vodka around you can mix it with, or beer, something? All right, we'll let you ride. We are going to drink actually Jason, who is our technical guy here. He's actually not here with us today.
So I'm the technical guy.
So he's a technical guy, but this is one of his favorites. So it's Old Rebel Yell 10 from Lux Distillery. Small little place that we got to visit on our bourbon trip a couple
Oh
years
yeah,
ago.
man, they got a fine distillery. They've modernized it. It's really it's beautiful. Bourbon has definitely taken over Kentucky, and the money is flowing into those distilleries. They are becoming rather opulent. So, Miss Best, do you mind me calling you Miss Best? I think you have the
We'll
most
call.
wonderful name ever.
It is good, isn't it?
It
It's
is.
very good. It's best.
Yeah.
So, how did you get into the role of being a police officer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I get asked that fairly frequently. And I served in the military, and then I was working for an insurance company, and the Seattle Police Department was hiring. So they had all the ads out, and I thought, I think I'm going to try something new and try my hand at this. So it wasn't one of those lifelong desires. There's so many people that I work with, there's so many people in law enforcement will tell you that they wanted to be a cop since they were, yay high, knee high to a duck, so to speak. But so much later in life, I just wanted to try it out and see if it was something that I might be interested in doing. And then almost 30 years later, I was still there.
Well, I tell you, it's anything's better than being a damn it insurance agent. I mean, that sounds boring as hell to me. So,
Sounds kind of personal, Howard.
yeah, it does.
There's another story there on that one.
Yeah, so
So,
we'll go with
so
that.
Carmen, what age were you when you got into actual law enforcement? Was it later in life you joined the department or decided to pursue the educational side of it and then transition into the job?
Yeah, I started, I think I was 26.
Okay.
I mean, right, I just turned 27, when I started in. So I've done a few things in life, but was still, I consider that very young, coming on, even though right now you can join the police department at age 21. But I was a little bit older than that. And, felt like I was probably a little more mature than maybe at 21, than I was at 21 for sure. So yeah.
Well, for all of our listeners out there, the people on YouTube can tell. Um, you started in 26. You've been in there 30. There's some math. You look like you're about 26 still. So, yeah,
You
obviously.
keep drinking that, whatever you got
Yeah,
going.
no, I'm telling you. I mean, you don't look like a normal police chief at all, which is that is a sincere compliment, ma'am.
Well, thank you. I'll be 58 in May.
No, good for you. Absolutely.
Well, I hope you're enjoying your retirement. It looks like you can. You're just shaming all the other retirees for sure.
I'm still working. I'm still doing a lot of stuff, but yeah, I am enjoying the time away, yeah, from the department right now. But still staying involved in so many different things because, it's hard to spend, really, in my case, almost half your life in a career and not feel, at least I think, and not feel a sense of, alignment and a great deal of wanting to stay connected to the field. So I still do. I've only been retired just over a year and a half, but I still do a lot of stuff, in alignment with police and policing and law enforcement and staying pretty active on that front. It just matters to me.
Well,
Go
well,
ahead.
well, being a police officer in Seattle, especially new at 26 years old, I mean, first of all, they give you a gun, then they give you some rain gear, right? Because it rains all the time in Seattle. That's what I mean. That's what most people think. But Seattle, I've had the pleasure of visiting there several times. It's a beautiful city, but it's geographically kind of set up interesting because it's almost peninsula and you have a lot of bridges to cover. What was your first assignment in Seattle?
For a short period, I worked in the north end of the city, which you can't get to the other end of the city without going across a bridge, from North Seattle. And then I worked up on the Capitol Hill area, which is really right in the center of Seattle. So, that area. And the geographically, it's not that large, but there's so many people that live there. It's a very condensed population. So a lot of people in the Capitol Hill area where I worked.
So, when you talked about you start out on the north side of the city and then end up there in Capitol Hill, throughout your career as you worked up to chief, what other, were you a beat cop your whole career? Did you
Yeah.
kind of bounce around? Did you do detective work? Did you do, narcotics, whatever? What was the path your career went?
I did different things. That is one of the beauty of working for a really large agency like Seattle and some of the other larger city agencies that there's so many opportunities and options for different work. I mean, pretty much like most agencies, everybody starts out in a car working patrol for the most part. You have to learn how to do that and answering calls for service. But for me, I did that. Then I worked as I don't know if you would remember the DARE program, but I was a DARE officer for a while and went to the schools and with kids. And then from there, I worked in DARE, and then I was a public information officer and working with the media for a while. I worked patrol in between. Then I got promoted to sergeant and went back to patrol, back at the East Precinct where I worked for a while. And then I got pulled back to be the supervisor, the first supervisor. They didn't have one previously, but they wanted to now have a supervisor for the media unit. And I did that. And then I promoted to lieutenant and worked, at the North Precinct, worked there for a while and watch commander, just moved on to a whole different bunch of different things. Lieutenant, narcotics, robbery, gangs, fugitive, community outreach, precinct commander, chief of investigations, deputy chief of police, and then the chief of police.
So it sounds like you did everything but fly a helicopter.
Right. You didn't fly a
Pretty
helicopter?
much there, right? No, sorry, Carmen. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, even with all of that, there's so many other things I didn't do, like harbor or SWAT or
Sure.
kind of
Well,
things out.
and you said something that I get contacted still to this day by a lot of college kids or people, young adults that are talking about wanting to go into law enforcement, and they're like, "Hey, what advice do you have?" And this is something I love. It's one of my favorite things to answer. And even though Tulsa, our police department is not as big as Seattle's, we're a little over 800 here in Tulsa, and I think you guys are 1,400, something like that, give or take.
Uprise, yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, same type of deal here. But it is one of the things I always tell them. It's like I tell them, get your education for one. It'll help you throughout your career and promotions and things like that. And try to find a larger agency to work for because you do. Even, listen, you and I both know there are some people who they get in patrol and they stay there 30 years and they love it. And that's great. But you get burned out in spots just like any job you would have, and there's whether it's patrol, SWAT, narcotics, those type of things, you get burned out and you need a different assignment. And so if you work for that larger agency, you have all these opportunities to bounce around every 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it takes, be in a spot for 10 years and then go, man, I'm gonna go try something different. And that is, I'd say the same thing over and over and over. Don't go work for some tiny little department where you just don't have any opportunities for advancement or just trying different things.
Yeah, I agree. But the thing that on here, we see a lot of police officers. A lot of them are SWAT. A lot of them are in patrol. A lot more gang units. A lot of that kind of like sexy stuff. But the real action and the way that a police force operates is through people like yourself who understand how to deal with people and not only deal with the community, but deal with the politicians and deal with the police officers and kind of protect the police officers from the politicians and the community sometimes when they go bad, which there's not a whole lot of people that can do that job.
Yeah, well, definitely you're talking more along the Chiefs line, and those are it's definitely a challenge there for myself, for anybody who is a chief and wants to be a chief. But I really like what you said to start off with, which was, it's a people job. That is what it is. And so so many times people watch, television shows and they see the car chases and the gunfights and the cases that are, they find the homicide suspect in an hour and is convicted and all of that. But obviously that's not real life. And so much of what the job is being able to connect with people who often don't look like you, no matter who you are, don't have the same religion, whatever it is, people who are different, you need to be able to connect with them, to communicate with them, to show empathy and care, and sometimes even to the suspects, depending on what they've done, because they're not having a good day either, and to be able to be respectful. Now, some don't haven't learned that, so that's a different story. But generally speaking, that's what the job is, right? It's really about dealing with people, and often in some of their most vulnerable times of their life for whatever reason.
No, 100%. And Carmen, you probably don't know much about my time in the police department here, but I supervised our gang unit for the latter half of my career. And that was my number one thing. I wanted guys that were proactive. You're going to know who they are as patrol officers when they apply for those positions in the unit. But we looked for people that, one, I didn't want guys that get complaints as a patrol officer because that means they're out there, there's a
Right.
reason why somebody consistently gets complaints. I understand there's bogus complaints that happen, but when someone has a pattern of complaints, there's a reason that's happening. But guys that we're coming in to work for is just like you said, you're dealing with people that, don't look like us, don't work, or we don't live around. Our gang problem in the city of Tulsa is within our black community. Well, our police department, we do not have a very large number of black officers on it. And so I did not have a lot of black officers apply to be in the gang unit. So when guys that were coming in, I was always looking for officers that knew how to talk to people. And that's the number one thing. It's like, hey, there were guys that were good cops, but I knew they didn't know how to talk to people the right way for what we did in that job. Because that's the only way we're going to get information. It's the only way we're going to get cooperation. And that was the biggest part of it. Some of the guys that were in my squad, that's what they know how to talk to people. And it's amazing the amount of information they're able to get out of their informants, suspects, witnesses, and things like that just because they know how to relate to anybody.
Yeah, I commanded the gang unit for a time, and really enjoyed that spirit. I wasn't one of the gang detectives, I was the boss, but really enjoyed the experience. And they all had, great communication skills and people skills and a great deal of empathy. And even at the times they were sometimes arresting some folks for their activity. I mean, they would ask for certain detectives because they knew them, or the detectives would go out of their way because they knew the family to do something, to help the family because of the situation. So many things that came up that really aren't known to the public, but I had a great deal of respect for what they did. And I often would go out with them at night and ride with them, as they were doing their work, me and the other supervisors, just to, just to see them at work. But they really had a great deal of empathy.
Yeah,
More,
exactly. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but and that's exactly it. One of the, I think the greatest things for anybody that works in those type of assignments is where, let's say a patrol officer catches a suspect, whether he's arrested for something, and he's like, man, I'll only talk to officer such and such, and it's because they do. It's like, hey, they're in trouble, but they still have the respect for certain cops because they know how to deal with them. They've treated them well before, and they're like, man, I'll talk to this guy.
You'll be fair with them.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
the thing that's interesting about Seattle, and I don't think a lot of people know, is it's quite diverse. Seattle has a very diverse population, and it also it's the home right across one of those bridges. How many bridges actually go into Seattle? Like 400?
it only seems like that. I think the main, I want to say four major bridges that go into the city, that the city uses, because there's two that come from North Seattle into downtown, and then there's I-90 and 520 that connect Seattle to the east side.
Right. Well, when you go east, you go over to a place called Bellevue,
Right,
right? And
right.
Bellevue's known. They've got a little company there. What's the name of it? Micro. They do computer stuff.
Something soft, maybe.
Yeah, there's a gate on it, like a bill gate on it or something. I don't know. So you've got that, but your other big source of income in Seattle is a
The fish market.
yeah, they do. They throw fish at you. Well, they fly there a lot, so they've got Boeing there, which is, I mean, two of the biggest companies in the world are in your city.
Mhm.
Um, which
Amazon is there. Look, Amazon, Boeing, like as you mentioned, right across. Microsoft is in the area. Uh, the Costco is there. There's a lot of major companies in the area. We're a port city, right? We're right on the water. Uh,
right.
so there's lots of trade and lots of ability to work with those issues and a lot of major companies.
Well, I may be wrong, but somebody told me that there's more PhDs per capita in and around Seattle than anywhere else in the world, right?
I don't know if that's true. I haven't heard that, but it is a very highly educated area.
So when you have people that are that educated, that are that smart, they probably think they know everything, right?
Well, I found that people across all genres think they know everything.
Yeah, I've dealt with some
Yeah.
dummies. I mean, dummies. People have dropped out of school in 8th grade and they think they know everything. Hell, my 19-year-old son thinks he knows everything.
There you
Yeah,
go.
every
You know,
19-year-old's a
so
dummy for sure. But I mean, I mean, you're dealing with the criminal element, and then you're actually dealing with the richest people in the world, and I'm sure that comes with its own set of problems.
It does. Well, I don't think there's any major city that doesn't have that, some of those elements of either, with the very wealthy, the very exclusive neighborhoods, and they also have, other areas where they're struggling, economically or with other issues. So, I mean, there's always that balance. You just have to, you don't want to over police someplace and under police another or play favorites. That's a whole constitution that's supposed to hold us accountable to everybody equally.
it's kind of a big deal.
It is kind of a big
Time
deal. I think
is.
that
Yeah, it
really,
kind of is a big deal. You violate that, you end up in court.
so
Yeah.
how did you get on the short list to be the police chief?
Oh my goodness. You'll have to Google it, but it was a lot of drama to actually make it. And I was so glad that, I did. But there, I don't know how many people applied to the job initially, but a number of applicants, it's a national search. I was the interim chief for a number of months. And then they narrowed it down. They did a series of interviews and community meetings, etc. And they narrowed it down to five of us. And then they asked us to do, in this very unusual turn of events, never before, asked us to do some sort of a writing exercise. And when we did that, they excluded two of us, myself being one, and the other person from Los Angeles, the running, which seemed, I'm going to be honest, inherently unfair and really not it just didn't make sense to me. I mean, I wrote about that in my book. It's like I was like I don't see how I don't make, not in a vanity way, but just looking at the resume and all the work, how I don't make the top three. But I did not make the top three. I imagine there were some shenanigans there that I'll never know. But community, in my case, so I didn't make the top three. I mean, my life wasn't over. I just thought for whatever reason, this wasn't meant for me to be, for it to be for me, I should say. And but then a lot of community people came forward and rallied and marched and wrote letters. I had no idea any of this was going on. I figured I'm going to help the three people that are coming in to try to make sure that we get the best person possible to run the agency that I love and to work with the men and women that I have grown up with. I wanted it to be a success no matter what. And if it wasn't going to be me, whoever it was going to be, I wanted them to be successful. But people just really rallied and really wanted me to be within that top three. And so ultimately, a person dropped out, and I was placed back on in the running for the top three in the position, and then got the job at the end of the day. But it was my first foray into a highly political atmosphere, and it never stopped. That was the beginning, and it just kind of kept going for the next 2.5 years. But that's really what happened. It was people that came forward, community members, women's groups. I'd been there almost 20 some years, and I'd worked a lot with a lot of these people, and they had a lot of confidence and trust in me. And at the confirmation, I was so gratified at the confirmation. So many community members came forward and just started telling stories, things I had forgotten. And you would know this, Sean. I mean, you put some time. You'll do things and you forget about it, but it really makes an impact on the person. And so you kind of, go on with your next day, and then they remember these things. And so it was very gratifying to hear people talk about it. And I was very grateful and thankful to get the job. And also felt that immense pressure that I need to do very well, right? I don't want to let people down.
Sure, sure. And by no means, I hope this doesn't come across that I'm diminishing your resume or anything like that. But I will say this: I know being in those PIO type of positions.
What the hell's a PIO?
The public information officer.
All right, thank you.
You're basically you're almost the face of the department. So the public that sees you, whether it's at a crime scene talking about what happened, or you're on the news doing the most wanted, or just talking about something the department's doing with schools or grants or whatever it may be, the public starts to relate that face, that person, as a face of the department. So that's who they see. They usually see, the PIO and the chief are the people they start to understand. And so when you get that opportunity to be out there, and you're well spoken and you represent the department well, you represent yourself well, they resonate towards that. And I have seen that both from within my own department. We had a guy that was a PIO here by the name of Lucky Lamons. He went into politics afterwards. Another guy we're actually going to do.
Did you say his name was Lucky Lemons?
Lucky Lamons. Lucky Lamons. One of the funniest dudes ever, man.
It's Lucky Lemons here.
Lucky Lamons. Another guy by the name of Scott Walton, who we're actually going to do another episode with here on the podcast. He was our PIO for a while. He's now the sheriff of a neighboring county. And I'm not saying it's like a springboard, but it is. It's, if you are a driven police officer, if you are articulate, you've had a very good career, the public respects you. You're someone they know, they trust, and they want to lead their agency.
Right. There's that too. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to know what was the written test? Did you have to write a haiku? What was it? What is your 5-year plan? I mean, that sounds pretty arbitrary.
Something along those lines. I literally don't remember at this point, right? But it was something along those lines. And it's hard to, something like that, how do you even grade something like that? It's your perspective and your planning going forward. So, but to touch back on what Sean said, I do think the PIO position is an incredibly, it's public facing. I learned a lot there. There was a lot of time between me being a PIO and being a chief, but I certainly got to learn a lot. What I loved about that position, honestly, was that I learned so much about the agency.
Yep.
As you are speaking about you know everything, but the chief knows it, you know it,
Yep.
right? So even sometimes you're giving them notes about, you don't want to say that because this is going on. You really are in the know. You're seeing the organization from that bird's eye view, how all these units connect and how the information flow and all of that. You learn a lot as a PIO. I mean, you really do learn a lot about the organization.
Hey, Carmen, let me ask you real quick. What's your personal opinion? I know a lot of agencies, and I don't know if Seattle's done it or not, but a lot of agencies are now hiring civilians, usually former like news anchors or news
Right.
people, news reporters, to be their PIOs. We haven't done that in Tulsa, but I know our sheriff's department here has recently done it. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's funny. When I was a PIO, I absolutely was against it. I
Of
was like,
course.
no
It-
way.
When you're the chief, you're like, hell yeah.
When I was a PIO, I was dead set against it and fought it tooth and nail, brought the union in the whole 9 yards. I will say this, Seattle has a hybrid because I think there's benefits to both. And
Sure.
so I think it's really important to have somebody who has experience on the scene, who knows what the cops are going through, who knows the people who are responding, who can really talk about incidents. And in Seattle, I think, we keep a uniformed officer on scene to do that as a PIO. But there's other things, now the world is changing so much. Back when I was a PIO, we still did press releases and faxes. I mean, nobody
Yep.
does that anymore. Now everything's 24 hours. You got your Twitter and your
Twitter.
Instagram, your Facebook, and your speeches and your community groups and all that. So having a professional communications expert in the organization, I think is very important. So, we hired, a former news anchor and professional to help with all those things. And then we still had 2 or 3 officers on staff as well, and had a collaborative approach to it because there's just so much more involved now, and everything is happening like this, and news is going really quickly. So I think
Yep.
you need to.
So on the timeline, when did you become chief?
What year?
Yes, ma'am.
2018.
Okay. So you were in there a couple of years, and then the policing world kind of blew up a little bit, huh?
Yeah, it was like just over a year, and it just for me, my story, and I'll make it quick because I know that we have limited time. But essentially, come 20, let's see, it was in 2020, I guess. I'd been there over a year. We had the worst mass shooting in downtown Seattle. We had to deal with all of that and all the angst around businesses and people who were coming in and out, and just it was terrible.
Hey,
So
let me interrupt you for a second. Fill us in on that. A lot of our listeners probably don't know about that mass shooting.
yeah, well, so it ended up being 3 people downtown. They were basically shooting at each other, but not a very good shot. In the middle of the afternoon, shot 8 people,
Ooh.
killed 2, and people who it was the middle of the business day, right in the heart of downtown at Third and Pine. And so so the folks that were coming out of Amazon's got a big building right there. Their people are coming out of work. There's a McDonald's there. There's other businesses, and they're shooting at each other and hit 8 people and killed 2 people who were just on the street. One of the people who was shot was, I think he was 9-year old boy. Uh,
Ah,
he was homeschooled. He was there in Seattle with his family. It just tore my heart up. There to go see the aquarium, and ends up, in the hospital. And they were when they were triaging him, I remember the officers were saying that he would say, "There's other people hurt. I'll be okay." This little kid on the street.
oh.
Wow.
So it was bad.
What were these three shooting at each other over?
Oh,
And
I'm sure it was a drug related type of deal. And then they fled, and we ended up with the help of the U.S. Marshal's Office. So thankfully for them, we tracked them down to Las Vegas. They were in Las Vegas, partying it up. After all this, we were able to locate them, take them into custody. So that happened, and then right after that, excuse me, the pandemic hit, and it started right outside of Seattle, like in Kirkland, which Bellevue, Kirkland, they're all right there together
right, right.
where it started. So we were the first major organization that had to address COVID, and nobody knew what it was and what to do. And so there was a lot of work that went into understanding, how we could respond and be essential responders and keep our people safe. there's lots of different rules about, social distancing and, protective equipment and protective gear and how we approach folks. And it was a quick and fast learning lesson. There was no roadmap because we hadn't dealt with it before. So we went through all of that. And then we thought we were past COVID, but we're still dealing with it. So, but we
Right.
went through the first initial phases, and then the murder of George Floyd, protest nightly, Antifa, anarchists mixed in with some of those crowds, lots of, just a lot coming on the agency. It was a very, very difficult time. Uh, and then we finally worked through that. And then we had the CHOP and the CHAZ, which is the Capitol Hill autonomous zone that turned into the Capitol Hill organized protest zone, where these folks from all over converged into like a 6 block area and just basically took it over. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. And then we had the defund the police movement. And then we had the council that wanted us to lay off a bunch of officers. So it was just one issue after another. I was getting very little sleep. I gotta
I
tell you.
can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot that COVID was up in Kirkland. That's where it started. So that was like December 2019.
Yeah.
First cases were coming up that were found, and then 2020 is when January is when it
Yeah,
really.
yeah, when it really started hitting. So we really got, really got the notice of it. It was like around February, March-ish of that year. Yeah.
Damn, maybe you shouldn't have had been the People's Choice Awards on that. You had a lot to deal with. But with that recognition of you being, you were the first African American female police chief over a major city in the United States.
I wasn't. I was the first one
What?
in Seattle. I was the first
Yeah.
one in
Oh,
Seattle. Yeah,
okay. I'm sorry.
yeah. I don't want to take away from all those people who did it before. So I was the first one in Seattle, which was great. I love that. But there were some others before.
So you mentioned we'll kind of talk about the Chaz and dealing with all that. Um, from just, I guess, from a management standpoint as the chief, but also from just, hey, you're a police officer. That's your city. You've been there. You've worked that area as a beat cop younger, in your career. What was that like? Just seeing that all, transform and just happen there. And kind of describe, I mean, I know, what was it like, 9 blocks, or I mean, if you kind of break it down, the size of it, the number of people there, obviously the news talked about the different crimes that went on and that type of stuff.
It was surreal. I mean, it was really just hard to wrap your head around all that was happening at the time. we we were we opened up some of the protest areas, and I wrote about it in my book, but against our better judgment, so because of that, and all of the people converging onto the precinct, we ended up evacuating the precinct, supposedly temporarily, but it took a lot longer than we had ever anticipated to get ourselves back within the facility and in the building. So it was about I'd say a maybe 6 block radius area in the heart of Capitol Hill. And the precinct was enclosed within that area. And people just started showing up from all over. I think that as I understand it, like the call went out, people from Oregon and other places in the country started showing up and converging onto the area and really taking over the space. And I think there was a lot of discussion, a lot of different views about what it was. Our officers, when they went back the next day to go into the precinct, they were basically told, this is our sovereign land and you have to leave. And we didn't know what the heck,
What?
what? It
Yeah.
just sounds crazy, right? It's like, what? But we really didn't, I mean, we really didn't get, we really didn't overreact because it was just like, who are these crazy folks? What are they talking about? Just try to figure out what we got here, having no idea, that what the future would hold. So, that happened, and then we were trying to negotiate and figure out, what was going on and who they were, what this was all about. And meanwhile, people were just flooding into the area. And there wasn't a lot of will or political will, to be honest with you, to do anything about it. I mean, I think if you look back, you'll see some of the quotes from, elected officials that they just really didn't see this as a big deal. It's like Occupy, let the people do what they're going to do. But from the beginning, and I'm so glad from the beginning, we were pretty vocal about, look, they can't just come onto this neighborhood and take over a neighborhood. This is like insane.
Yep.
And so, but there wasn't a lot of political will to do much about it, and everybody kind of wanted to treat it like a freedom of speech, people assemble thing. But they literally were blocking off roads from people being able to have access, from emergency access. Ultimately, they started, say that they wanted to have an area where this, no police, is our autonomous zone. And then it's our organized protest zone, and we're staying here and we're occupying all the facilities. And while they didn't actually occupy the police precinct, they, were staged all around it. And, situations were getting pretty bad. And I went to a number of press conferences saying, this is bad. There's a lot of illegal stuff that's happening here. You don't really see it as much during the day, but at night, all sorts of things were happening. And we had rape, we had robbery, we had assaults, all
Two
of the,
homicides, didn't you?
well, ultimately 2 homicides, happened. When the homicides happened, then people were starting to think, oh, this might not be good, right? But now they've been there for several weeks, and now we have to figure out how we're going to move all those folks out and not have quote unquote, a mini Waco there, with folks that are there, folks that are armed, folks. Some of them, the mental state was questionable on a good day. We just had this whole confluence of people there, and really trying to figure out how to deal with it and address it. Once we got the order from the mayor, because we have a rule, a law, standing law, and that we can't. It's a court case. We can't remove people from tents without a search warrant. That's it's considered a domicile, and a lot of those folks were living in tents, and so we were going to have to, in order to move them, we weren't going to be able to serve individual search warrants on every tent.
My
So
goodness.
we needed that executive order, or something that, in order to be able to move people along. Ultimately, we got it. We had wonderful people. I would like to take credit, but I can't, for making all the plans. I certainly approved of them, to come in and to clear it out and to take over the area and make it public again.
And they were there, what, like 3 weeks? Is that what it was? Something like that? Or,
Closer to 6 weeks.
oh, 6 weeks. Golly.
Well, and it's shocking that this is you're basically having a influx of, I don't know how to say it other words than pot stirrers, right? I mean, they're coming to protest in your city from other cities, using this as a convergence of a place to do protests. And most of the time, protests should be done if you're going to do something like that. I mean, we see the Million Man March. We see tons of stuff in Washington, but well, what was the nexus? Why'd they pick Seattle?
I really, that I can't answer, but I will say this. Seattle has a great and long history of protests. Seattle, Portland, and some, that West Coast, sort of swatch is, protests happen all the time. I mean, it's a protest place. There was no doubt in my mind we were going to have protests after the murder of George Floyd. We knew that was going to happen, but we couldn't have foreseen some of the other events that transpired because of that.
Is Seattle overall? I mean, obviously, this was you talked about George Floyd murder. It was a anti-police type situation. Prior to this, was there a lot of animosity between parts of the public and the police department? Were there police protests, within the last 5 years, 10 years, anything like that? Or was just a unique next level type of deal?
It was one of those unique situations. We always had, issues about accountability and holding police accountable, and we were under consent decree, and so there were a lot of things we were working on with community on, but we weren't having people protest the department per se. They hadn't had that in a long time, and I felt like things were moving in the right direction. But it just shows you how things can change on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
you know. Then we have the murder of George Floyd. We have all the protests. People were mad because we used tear gas to disperse some of the crowds. And in my judgment, at that time, it made sense to do.
Of course.
And then, and then here we are. That's just where it went. Now, since then, I didn't think it could get much worse, but since then, the Seattle lost, close to 400 officers that left the organization. 400. Not exactly four, maybe it was 380, but it was close to 400. Yeah.
And like I said, your department was roughly or authorized at 1,400. So I mean, you're talking 30%, almost 25% or something like that. Give or take a little bit there, and that's huge,
It is.
huge, including yourself. I mean, you ended up leaving the agency yourself, correct? Obviously, right?
I left, excuse me, I got a little scratchy throat there. I left on principle. I loved that police department and the people and the city, all of it, and even with all of its stress and strife and turmoil, I really would have loved to have stuck around. But when they said they were going to let go of, initially they were saying 50% of our officers,
That's
they ultimately got it down to 100. I was done. And especially, I mean, I've explained this many times, especially because we had gone on this big recruiting campaign to hire more women and people of color, to have the department better reflect the community. We brought these people in, we offered them like $15,000 to lateral into the police department and $7,500 for new hires, with the promise of coming to a good organization, having a lifelong career. And then 6 months later, we're like, no, we're actually gonna lay all these people off, and we're not gonna have you here. And it just felt so duplicitous and so disingenuous. I couldn't do it, and I certainly couldn't do it as the first, African American woman police chief. And here's the legacy: we lost all the minority folks and the women. I wasn't gonna stick around for that, and that
no.
was,
And
yeah.
like you said, just because of principle, good for you. And this was what city council, I'm assuming, their type of ideas. And again, over the past year and a half, with all the stuff that went on, there was a lot of, city councils or mayors or stuff like that across the country that talked about that. The 50% reduction, it wasn't a funding issue, correct? It was just they thought we don't need police.
Part of the defund
Yeah,
narrative, you know, and my thing was, my whole issue with this was early on, is the first time I'd ever dealt with something quite, like that, was okay, if you're saying you don't need the officers and you want to do alternative things, what are they? Show us the plan. I didn't just throw it out, the baby out with the bathwater and say, absolutely no, that's crazy.
right.
Even if I didn't necessarily agree with it, I'm open minded enough to say, okay, well, what is the plan then? How are we going to address these, really prevalent issues that are happening all across the city? And I never heard of a plan. It was just like, we want to get rid of half the cops. And then it's like, and then what? Right? What's going to happen when that happens? I certainly didn't want to be around for that either as a police
Hell
chief.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Well, I mean, that's definitely short sighted, and everybody knows that politicians kind of ebb and flow with the tide of constituents or perceived constituents, and usually in cases like that, it's a very small, very active, zealous group that is yelling at the counselors over something. It doesn't reflect the will of the community. You spoke earlier about how the community came to your aid whenever they gave you the college essay that you had to do to be the chief. What the community have to say whenever you were like, "Oh fuck y'all, I'm out of here." What did they say to that?
Well, it was hard, and some of the folks really didn't think I should leave. And in fact, unbeknownst to me, many of the clergy got together and held a press conference, for me to for me to be come back and be the chief. But I was like, yeah, you guys don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm at peace with this, and it's time for me to move on. And I felt a little bit like I was worried that I didn't want people to think I was giving up on the department, because I certainly wasn't. But at some point, you just can't. Staying there means that I'm acquiescing or that I'm supporting those decisions, and I'm not. And
Right, especially when you went out to all that work to do all that diversity and equity and inclusion stuff. I
uh,
mean, that's good policing right there in itself. Well, like we told you when we started this thing, it goes pretty fast. We got about 3 minutes left.
oh my gosh, that did go fast.
Yeah, you want to tell us what you're doing now? And
You keep mentioning this book. You got to
yeah,
show it. You
you
got to
got
tell us
yeah.
about it.
Right. So, well, I'm working for actually, I work for a private security company now. I have one of their accounts. I help them on, just some of their security issues. And then I still co-chair the Human and Civil Rights Committee with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, a job that I love doing, talking about these issues. and working with cops from all around the world. It's a great organization. And then, a lot of boards and committees that I work on, for all public service related. And then I'm doing some work on the artificial intelligence board with Axon, a company that I think is doing really good things. And so I'm excited. And I wrote a book, and I'm going to have to show my book. It's called Black in Blue, Leadership Lessons on Breaking Barriers and Racial Reconciliation. And in it, I just give some little life lessons that I learned over my time in being a police chief and other times, just, little things in life that I think are really important lessons that people can learn from. And I have some interesting anecdotes. And of course, I talk about the chopper and the CHAZ, which I'll be talking about quite frequently because there's lots of lawsuits out of that. So I keep getting subpoenaed back to court. But yeah, it just doesn't end. But I'm really excited. I'm glad I wrote the book, Black and Blue, Leadership Lessons on Breaking Barriers and Racial Reconciliation. I hope that people will pick it up. It's at Amazon and Target and a lot of other stores. www.blackandbluebook.com, and you can find it.
That's
Love it.
awesome.
Love it. Love it.
Man, it's been a pleasure. You're our first chief. We feel very special.
Well, this is awesome. You guys are great. That hour went so quickly.
Absolutely.
You're very interesting. We're not so much, but you've got great stories. That's why we do this.
Yeah, it flies. We just keep you talking. Makes it easy on us. So
Well, why we started this podcast was we wanted to humanize police officers, and I think that you've done a very good job of kind of showing both sides of the role, what it feels like to be in the political aspect of it, and what it feels like to be a community leader and be a cop all in one. So we really appreciate that view that you showed.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So maybe you have me back sometime. Maybe you have the current chief back to talk about some of those issues.
love to.
That would be great.
Absolutely. Both. We'll say yes to both of those.
Awesome.